He was an unstable and childlike man, capable of the most unusual whims, but at the same time a sensitive and generous person. He was irresponsible with money, a gambler who could arrive late to his concerts or even never show up, but also a perfectionist, happy to give his best to an audience of just one, if that one was appreciative enough. He was a true genius, the first and maybe the only European jazz performer who influenced his American colleagues, practically the inventor of jazz guitar. He was Django Reinhardt, an itinerant gypsy, an almost illiterate man who overcame the most terrible circumstances and left us a whole world of musical poetry. Jean-Baptiste Reinhardt was born in a gypsy encampment in Belgium on January the 23rd, 1910. His parents were both itinerant gypsy entertainers. His mother, a dancer and acrobat, his father, a clown and musician. Known as Django from his early years, he soon proved to have strong musical talents. At 12, a neighbor gave him an old banjo guitar, a rare six-stringed instrument he learned to play without any formal teaching by watching the way other gypsy musicians played. From then on, he advanced quickly, and soon his musicality and his technique were admired both inside and outside the encampment. Until amplification was invented, the guitar wasn't a suitable instrument for jazz. Its sound was too weak in comparison with other instruments, so the best a guitarist could do to be heard was to play strong rhythm chords. In the first acoustic days, the banjo seemed a far better choice. The early history of guitar in jazz is often reduced to one name, the American Eddie Lang, who died very young after making some outstanding recordings with violinist Joe Venuti. At 17, Django began his adult life. He got married to a gypsy girl named Bella from his own settlement and began playing with dance groups at a cafe called La Java. The following year, he made his first recordings playing banjo as a sideman, accompanying a popular accordionist. His name was slowly gaining recognition in Paris, where he was now settled, and he was even offered a job by English big band leader Jack Hilton. It was the year 1928, and although he hadn't yet recorded any guitar solos, everything looked prosperous for young Django. But then, on November the 2nd, tragedy struck. In his celebrated biography of Django, his longtime friend and admirer, Charles Delaunay, described the incident. It was 1 o'clock in the morning. Django had just come back from La Jada. He found the caravan filled with artificial flowers, which were to be taken to the cemetery to be sold the next day. They were all over the place. His wife, who was expecting a child, was already in bed. He was just getting undressed when he heard a noise amongst the flowers that might have been a mouse. Picking up the only candle, he went forward to have a closer look. But the candle was burnt down almost to nothing, and while the wax part stayed in his hand, the wick fell on the celluloid flowers, which suddenly burst into flames. In the space of a few minutes, the caravan was a raging inferno. Both Django and his wife survived the fire, but he was very badly burned from his knee to his waist. And what was worst, his left hand was inflamed and twisted. When taken to a hospital, the doctors suggested amputation. But Django refused, and his caravan friends soon took him home again in terrible pain. Taken to a private sanatorium with the money his family and friends could collect, he spent over a year there until he could walk again. First with the aid of a stick, then all alone. His hand, however, was a very different matter. It was badly scarred, and his fourth and fifth fingers were paralyzed for life. The general opinion was that although Django had survived, he would never again play a string instrument. Everybody was convinced that Django had already played his last notes. Fortunately, they were wrong. Someone in the caravan had the idea of bringing Django a guitar, and during his year-and-a-half convalescence, he retaught himself how to play the instrument, producing a new and amazing technique that matched his present limitations. Although no one could have predicted it, by 1931 he was again in the music business, armed now with his guitar, ready to begin one of the most fascinating careers in jazz history. But in those days, jazz still wasn't well known in Europe, and Django played different kinds of popular dance music. This was going to change in 1932, when several black American jazz artists did their first European tours. The most important of these performers were Duke Ellington and Louis Armstrong.
Now, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Armstrong, and we're going to sing one of the good ones for you. Beautiful number. I cover the waterfront. I cover the waterfront. I like it. Look at that. Look at that. 1, 2. I'm watching the sea, cause the one I love soon come back to me. Steady, steady, I covered the world in search of my love, and I'm covered by the solid skies above. Oh, baby, every mind is surely waiting, hoping it's on the are you forgetting? Will you remember? Will you return? I covered the one. I'm watching the where will you? Are you forgetting? Will you remember? Will you return? I covered the one. I'm watching the sea, 'cause the one I love
When Django heard Louis for the first time on a phonograph record, he was moved to tears and murmured, "Mon frère," my brother. So Django started playing jazz and developed a soloing style that would influence generations of guitarists. He possessed an unparalleled dexterity, a perfect sense of rhythm and structure, and a seemingly infinite gift for melodic improvisation and composition. And with jazz, he could show all that in a way that was impossible playing other music styles. Jazz attracted me, said Django, because it offered a perfection of form and instrumental precision that I admire in great music, but which are lacking in popular music. In early 1932, Django met a young pianist and violinist who would play an important role in his life, Stéphane Grappelli. Ironically, he was born in the same Paris hospital in 1908 that Django would first be taken to after the tragic fire of 1928. Grappelli began his music career in childhood and was soon playing for money, first in the streets, then in dance orchestras like Gregor and his Gregorians, where he played both violin and piano.
Mesdames, Messieurs, je me présente à vous, Grégor et ses Grégoriens.
With this group, he made a trip to Argentina, and after his return to France, the crucial encounter took place. The first time I saw Django, recalled Grappelli years later, I was playing with the saxophonist André Etienne. One night, 3 or 4 persons came into the club, all of them as different as could be imagined from the usual clientele. They listened to us attentively and stared hard at us, in a way that was, in reality, none too pleasant. They were of such dubious appearance that I thought they might be gangsters, or worse still, gangsters who disliked our music. Whilst I was observing these curious visitors, fascinated by their eccentric way of going on, it suddenly dawned on me that they must be gypsies. I was almost sure I'd already seen the tallest of them playing the guitar in the Paris streets. He came up to the band and made as though he wanted to have a word with me. In the most extraordinary French, he asked me to play a jazz number. I noticed that despite his apparent hardness, he was shy at heart. In 1934, Django and Stéphane formed a jazz string quartet, featuring them as soloists on the guitar and violin, accompanied by Roger Chaput on rhythm guitar and Louis Volat on double bass. That was a new experience in jazz, as by then all bands included piano, horns and drums. Django loved the string sound, but wasn't completely satisfied with the group. I could see something was worrying him, explained Stefan. And when I asked him what the trouble was one day, he replied, "It doesn't matter all too much. It's just that when you are playing, Stefan, you've got both Chapeau and me backing you. But when I'm soloing, I've only got one guitar behind me." The obvious solution was bringing a second rhythm guitar. Django's brother, Joseph Reinhardt. So the quartet became a quintet, which would be known for posterity as the Quintet of the Hot Club de France. The idea of a jazz string quintet didn't convince everybody at once. It seemed impossible to conceive of jazz music without trumpet and drums. So, although their early live performances were enthusiastically received, it was not easy for them to make their first recordings. Record companies didn't find them commercial enough. After some disappointing experiences with big firms, an obscure label called Ultraphone decided to take a risk on the group in 1934. The result was a tremendous success.
What is you blowing, Daddy? Let's do a little lover man there. About 5, you know.
The by now constant presence of renowned American jazz musicians in France took Django and Stephan's fame abroad. And they recorded with such important figures as Benny Carter, Bill Coleman, and the great Coleman Hawkins, with whom Django jammed for hours in Paris jazz clubs. Back in the United States, these musicians spread the word about Django's genius. You only find a musician like Django once in a century, said Ellington's trumpeter Rex Stewart, another frequent visitor. Soon, this marginal gypsy became one of the most popular personalities in Paris, a true national hero. This change in his status forced Django to adapt his behavior to the new circumstances. He modified his dressing style, buying the most elegant suits, and left the caravan, moving to a Paris hotel with his second wife Nagin and their pet monkey. At first, the hotel's owner protested about the mess occasioned by the monkey, but he never dared to throw out the famous gypsy guitarist he was so proud of having as a guest. Although always serious about music, Django wasn't known for his punctuality. He was usually late at recording sessions or club dates, and the two rhythm guitarists in the quintet often had to replace him. Everybody could forgive this, however, considering the magical sounds that came out of his instrument when he finally showed up. He was also an impulsive person who could stop playing if he thought nobody in the audience was paying attention to him. At the same time, he could play chorus after chorus if he discovered that at least one listener was appreciative enough. Sometimes he was in the mood and played for hours, whatever the context. Other times, he was simply not in the mood and didn't even show up at theatres or clubs. A fervent gambler, he loved every kind of game. His friends and family knew that if he wasn't at home, they could surely find him at a certain bar playing pool or card games. He was also fond of the unusual. Besides buying expensive clothes, he tried many things to make his stage appearances more impressive. During a famous scene, the character in Woody Allen's movie Sweet and Lowdown, in many ways inspired by Django, intends to open a show seated on a silver moon. That was hardly Allen's invention, but Django's. Once, Django appeared with his quintet at the Medrano Circus, explains Charles Delaunay. Enthralled as he was by any act that was out of the ordinary, and egged on by one of his musicians, who was something of a wag, he decided to have himself lowered from the ceiling on a luminous star. "It'll be real American stuff," he said with pride. However, when it came to the final rehearsals, a musician jokingly remarked that the rope looked none too strong, and Django was seized with fear. In the end, he preferred to make his entrance somewhat less spectacularly on a little truck which ran on rails. Over the following 5 years, the quintet made dozens and dozens of records that are now considered to be jazz classics, and travelled Europe to great success. The song Minor Swing, co-composed by Django and Stefan, became one of their most successful recordings. Although both had great respect and affection for each other, the unpredictable Django and the more reliable Stefan were two very different persons, and their relationship was at times hard to sustain. However, Grappelli was always patient, as he had very clear ideas about his partner's talent and his effect on the other musicians. Django was a genius, said the violin player, and was always ahead of his time. Guitarists were terrified of him. While in Germany, the quintet saw the first signs announcing the coming war. And in 1939, when war was finally declared, they were playing in London. Django was so terrified by the possibility of a raid over England that he hurriedly went back to Paris without telling anybody. Grappelli completed the London gig, but then Hitler invaded Paris. The violinist was forced to stay in England, and thus the quintet was broken. The violinist was forced to stay in England, and thus the quintet was broken. Its two big stars wouldn't see each other again until liberation. In Paris, Django formed a new group with clarinetist Hubert Rostaing, inspired by the modernist discs he had heard of Benny Goodman playing with electric guitar genius Charlie Christian. With all the American jazzmen gone, Django became the most revered jazz star in occupied France. In 1945, the same day the war ended, Grappelli, who was still in London, received a long-distance call from Django. They soon reunited again and recorded a poignant swing version of La Marseillaise. His Paris success had encouraged Django to try his luck in the United States. Thus, in 1946, he accepted Duke Ellington's invitation and crossed the Atlantic. However, his dreams of being acclaimed in America didn't come true. His performances were well received, but he, who spoke no English at all, didn't feel comfortable in American society and soon came back to France. "You see, brother," he declared soon after, "I prefer being the first in Rome to the second in Kansas City." However, it was completely obvious for everybody that he felt humiliated and considered the trip to be a personal failure. In fact, the cultural distance was even bigger. Not only could he not speak English, he could just read acceptably and barely write in French. Django had never attended school and was completely illiterate until adulthood, when Stefan Grappelli taught him some reading and writing rudiments. There are only a few extant documents showing Django's writing. One of them is a greeting card dedicated to a bar owner. The longer one is a letter he wrote with big childish calligraphy to Stefan during his American trip. Writing continued to be a mystery for him. When he saw sax player André Eckian typing fast on a typewriter without looking at the keyboard, he asked him admiringly, "However do you get the right letters? And however do you get the right notes?" quipped Eckian. "I see what you mean," added Django with a shy smile. Although other musicians had to transcribe his ideas, Django was a brilliant composer, author of dozens of tunes that have since become jazz standards, like Manoir de mes rêves, Blues Clair, Djangology, and above all, the wonderful Nuage, which means clouds. Django listened to all kinds of music. When asked what moved him the most musically, he answered, "There's Ravel's Valse Noble et Sentimentale. I can't forget Bach's Toccata and Fugue, where the music reaches my heart and makes me cry. Debussy is maybe the closest to my musical ideal, as in him I can find the sensitivity and intelligence that I demand from all music." In fact, Django attempted to venture compositionally into the great classical music forms. He composed an organ mass, which was performed at least once, and a symphony for choir and orchestra, which would include words by his all-time fervent admirer, Jean Cocteau. But Cocteau couldn't finish the text on time for the announced concert, and the conductor of the orchestra judged the music too modern, so the work wasn't ever performed. Both compositions' original scores were lost soon after, and have never been found since. Django also loved painting, and in the early 50s, in a period when his popularity decreased, obscured by the rise of modern jazz, and recording contracts were sparse, he moved to a new home in Samoa with Nagin and their little son Babik, who would also become a jazz guitar player. In Samoa, Django painted picture after picture. When any visitor wanted him to play the guitar, he usually answered, "Don't talk to me about music, at the moment I'm painting." According to Charles Delaunay, during this period, Django seemed to be more proud of his painting than of his music. But he had not been totally forgotten. And by 1953, the famous American jazz promoter Norman Granz set his eye on him. For Granz, Django recorded some songs that would be released in the brand new format, a long play disc. The wonderful music produced on that session was followed by the promise to include Django in the next Jazz at the Philharmonic tours, in which he would play side by side with figures like his old friend Coleman Hawkins, singer Billie Holiday, trumpet star Dizzy Gillespie, and alto sax genius Charlie Parker. It seemed that the old dream would at last come true. But none of this would ever happen. On May the 15th, 1953, Django's heart began to fail and stopped forever. He was only 43. His musical legacy, however, continues to astonish the world and has since influenced every jazz guitar to follow in his wake. "I was first inspired by Django," said Joe Pass. "I'd never heard anyone play like him, so flowing and modern. I wanted to play with exactly the same expression." Musically speaking, added Stefan Grappelli, Django was uncompromising. He was fully aware of his worth. A wrong note would have the same effect as an insult. He couldn't bear the mediocrity of certain accompanists. Despite his dreamy and peace-loving nature, he became violent and even sarcastic on these occasions. I believe that he heard more music than the orchestra was capable of playing. Not long after his death, the surviving members of the quintet were reunited for one last time, before the movie cameras, to play a tribute to Django. On this musical goodbye to their friend, seated next to Stefan Grappelli, Django's brother Joseph plays the lead guitar. Visibly moved, they performed this version of the quintet's classic minor swing.